Hello and welcome to the Beyond Biotech podcast number 105. I'm Jim Cornell and this is the weekly podcast from Labiotech. This week the subject of the podcast is treating corneal endothelial disease, but the treatment is possibly the first mass-market cell therapy. The company that's working on this is Aurion Biotech, based in the US, and to tell us how the company is hoping to restore vision in a unique way is Greg Kunst, CEO of Aurion. Hi Greg, maybe to get things started, could you give us an introduction to the company?
Sure. So Aurion Biotech is a relatively new company. So we formed the company in 2022. Aurion Biotech came out of a prior company called Cornea, which was a traditional tissue transplant company, been around for a number of years. They had acquired this technology out of Japan from a very famous corneal specialist named Shigeru Kaneshita. And Shigeru started his original work at the bench in 2002 and then got into patients in 2013. And so what we're doing is we're addressing a very prevalent disease called corneal endothelial disease with an allogeneic cell therapy treatment where we take endothelial cells off of deceased donors, and we're able to expand those cells from one donor to up to 1,000 treatments and put those into patients who have corneal endothelial disease and are starting to lose their vision. So it's a great company. We're based in Seattle, but we have a very large presence in Cambridge, Massachusetts. We have a smaller team in Japan. We're just recently approved in Japan and getting ready to commercialize there. Just short of 70 people worldwide.
Before we get into kind of the nuts and bolts of the interview, if you could kind of give us a bit of background on allogeneic cell therapies.
Yeah, allogeneic cell therapies are really, look, we think about where we want to go in cell therapy, it's the holy grail of cell therapy. And the reason why that's the case is traditional cell therapies that are approved today are things like CAR-Ts, where you need one donor for one treatment. Or more importantly, you're taking the cells out of the body of someone that's diseased, you're reprocessing and putting back in that same person. And while that's been a very meaningful treatment for difficult cancers, it's expensive, it's not scalable, it's hard to make it available worldwide. Allogenic cell therapy is the idea of, can we take a cell from a different person, expand those cells, and then put them into a diseased patient? And if that promise holds through, there's a multiplier effect in the number of patients that can be treated worldwide. And as of right now, we have very few allogeneic cell therapies that are either in advanced states of development or approved. This seems to be, what we're working on seems to be one of the most advanced and probably one of the most scaled. We believe this is the first mass market cell therapy. Our ability to really affect a large population of patients is certainly paramount to what we're doing.
Why is the eye a good target for allogeneic cell therapy?
It's a great question because there's very nuanced and important. So there's only two parts of the body that are immunoprivileged, and one is the eye. And so we don't deal with immunological responses like the rest of the body. So part of the challenge other cell therapy targets have to deal with is rejection, and that's not something that we see in the eye to any great extent. And so that's a huge advantage. The second one is the eye is very accessible. While the eye is small, it's easy to get into the eye and put cells in the eye versus if you're using a treatment for, let's look at, you take something like the diabetic approach or cell therapy, you've got to get into the pancreas. That's not easy, and that's a pretty invasive procedure. The eye is easily accessible. There's lots of ophthalmologists that do ophthalmic surgery, and again, the immunological responses are practically nil. So we think this is a very good target for cell therapy in general, but corneal endothelial disease is particularly a good target for allogeneic cell therapy.
And you just mentioned corneal endothelial disease. I wonder if you could tell me about the disease itself, what it is, and how many people have it, that kind of thing.
Yeah. What it effectively is the endothelial cells are the last layer of tissue that are on the cornea. So the back of the cornea, it's that layer that protects the cornea from the interior parts of the eye. And its function has one function, and that function is to regulate the amount of fluid that goes in and out of the cornea. You need some fluid to maintain hydration, but not so much that it causes edema and swelling. And we're all born with a certain number of endothelial cells. They're like brain cells. They don't naturally regenerate. And as we face aging, disease, trauma, those cells start to become reduced. And certain people, they lose enough of these cells where that function, that pumping function, is arrested or slowed. And once that happens, the cornea starts to have an influx of aqueous humor or that clear fluid that's inside the eye into the corneal tissues, and people start to lose vision. Now, here in the United States, admittedly, we have modern corneal transplants available when people get sick enough where they, generally speaking, they're 20/60, 20/70, 20/80, meaning they can't drive a car. They have some vision, but they can't drive a car. They have an option for corneal transplant surgery. Outside the U.S., it's very hard to find tissue and very hard to find surgeons to do it. And so in many parts of the world, even in advanced economies, we see people go nearly blind from corneal disease. And so at a high level, it is a prevalent disease. It's about 16 million people at any one given time in the U.S., Europe, and Japan that have it. And it's a bilateral disease, so it's really chasing 32 million eyes. Additionally, there's 8 million people in the world today that are fully blind from corneal disease simply because they don't have access to corneal transplants or tissue. So this is a major disease, and this is why we're so focused on the mass marketability of what we're doing. This is not something that can be solved with 1,000 treatments a year. This is something that can be solved with, in an ideal state, we're treating hundreds of thousands, if not millions of patients a year worldwide.
Is it purely age-related, or is there a genetic component to it?
Yeah, great question. So generally speaking, the most prevalent form of corneal disease is a genetic disease called Fuchs dystrophy. Fuchs dystrophy, the NIH supports that 4% of the population over the age of 40 is prevalent for Fuchs dystrophy, but admittedly, the prevalence rate goes up by age. So, if you look at someone that is 2 years old, the prevalence is basically zero or nearly zero. If you look at someone that's the age of 40, it's in the 1% to 2%. By the time you get to the age of 80, it's a high single digit. So it's like cataracts. Like as you get older and older, the rate of it goes up. Now, there are forms of corneal disease that are trauma related or surgical related, meaning that these are patients that have had prior surgery in the eye that because of either the procedure itself or maybe the surgeon touched the cornea, they had a reduction in corneal endothelial cells that caused what's called pseudophakic bullous keratopathy. But that's much more rare, particularly inside the U.S. Primarily what we see in the U.S. and in Western parts of the world is Fuchs dystrophy.
You mentioned the option of surgery. Is that really the only treatment for the disease currently?
Yeah, so for early disease, there's a hypertonic drop called Mira that's used to try to get some of the fluid out of the eye. It doesn't work very well, and it's not indicated for that. It's used off-label. However, to really treat underlying disease, the only real option is corneal transplant. Now, over the years, corneal specialists have gotten better and better at these procedures. So originally, it was a full thickness transplantation. So you take the whole cornea, off a deceased donor, you put a new cornea on the diseased eye of the person receiving the donation. That's a big surgery and has a very high failure rates, more than 50%. And then they got smart and said, well, maybe we can use a partial thickness transplant. And that became what's called DSECT. And the rates of rejection are about 20% in a DSECT procedure because you are using endothelial cells, decimase, and part of stroma. And then the most recent innovation is an even thinner graft called DMEC, which is just decimase and the cells. And that has a low single-digit rejection rate. And so we've seen dramatic improvements in this area. The problem, though, continues to be you need one donor for one treated patient. And these are big surgeries, so it's not scalable. Conversely, what we're doing, we're creating with one donor today, we can make up to 1,000 treatments. I think that number will go up dramatically over time. We've done our development labs many fold over that. But the ability to treat patients goes up dramatically. Additionally, it's a simple injection of cells. And so we're able to have this done by anyone who does cataract surgery. So instead of targeting 300 corneal specialists in the U.S., we're targeting 8,000 cataract, cornea, refractive specialists and really addressing the population, again, through our number of treatments we create and by way of the number of treaters. And lastly, it's minimally invasive, so we can do it much earlier in the treatment algorithm. This has got all the hallmarks of being a big transformation.
Are there any other companies or is there any other research developing other potential treatments for this?
Yeah, I always think the greatest form of flattery is competition, right? And so this is an emerging area where people are working in the space. There's a lot of work in regenerative medicine in this area, different approaches. Some are using iPSC cells. The idea there is, you'd have a master cell bank. It's interesting, but the cost of manufacturing is very high for that. Additionally, those are actually not endothelial cells. Those are endothelial-like cells. The beauty of the program that we have is we're asking natural endothelial cells to continue to be endothelial cells. And that's why our efficacy and safety profile is so good. And, our ability to scale at the level we do, I think advantage of iPSC cells are reduced. Additionally, there are other people that are looking at different approaches in the adult differentiated area. There's a program out of Stanford using magnets or charged ions within the cells to get them to adhere. In our program, we use a therapeutic called urokinase. It's a well-known therapeutic approved in ophthalmology for lowering eye pressure. That therapeutic's role in our cell therapy, in our final drug product, is to help the cells adhere. And we think that's the most benign approach to addressing corneal endothelial disease. So there are many others out there as well. I mean, but I would say we're the first. We're leading the way. We think we have the right solution. And, there'll be people behind us because it's a big category. It's a big area of unmet need. And areas where there's not additional competition, I always question whether you're addressing something that's really meaningful or not. We clearly are, as we see the number of people that are at the labs that are working in this area.
I wonder if you could go into a little bit more detail on exactly how your treatment works and what the treatment is.
Sure. We take from a deceased donor, and the greatest gift that someone can give at death is organ donation. So people that have agreed to donate, their organs to medicine. We take the corneas from those patients. We remove the endothelial cells. Again, these endothelial cells do not naturally regenerate, and we have a proprietary way to turn the regenerative process on in our manufacturing process. Expand the cells many fold over. So again, with one donor, we create 1,000 treatments. And then we can turn that process off. But then, by the way, turning the process off is as much, if not more important than turning the process on. You certainly don't want a replication process that keeps going for a lot of reasons. And then we suspend those cells into a urokinase. That's our final drug product, which helps the cells to adhere to the cornea. So again, what we're doing is we're injecting those cells. The cells then form a monolayer. And once that monolayer is formed, they start the pumping mechanism. What makes our program so unique is endothelial cells have one function, and their function is to pump. It's a single structure of cells. It's not a multicellular structure. It's not a multifunctional structure. So this actually makes the target straightforward to what we're trying to do. And I think that's part of the reason why we see such great results is we're not having to trick the body. We're not having to gene edit. We're not having to type test. We're not having to do any of the complex biotech items that some of the other cell therapies have to do, which makes our program quite de-risked right now.
Does your treatment address that chronic shortage of corneas? I guess it must.
What we know is for every 70 diseased eyes worldwide, there's only one donor available. And the rates of donation have not changed in over 30 years. If you go back and look in donation rates, for corneas, it's not a viable solution to address endothelial disease at a whole scale. And so by making 1,000 treatments every donor, we can treat the entire world today with our supply. Now, it will continue to increase our scaling. Our goal is to be able to take this to all around the world. So this is not just a U.S. problem or a European problem. This is a worldwide problem. I can tell you out in the developing parts of the world, there are no options. The availability of tissue and the availability of surgeons doing corneal transplant is practically nil. And so we've built a company. We could have stopped in our scaling where we are right now. We'd be very successful in the U.S., Europe, and Japan. But we chose to keep working on what we're doing because we want to make this available worldwide. I can see a day in 10 years where this is being done in India and China and more so in sub-Saharan Africa. And that's the company we've built. We've built our cost structure to do that. We've built our manufacturing scale to do that. We've built our organization to be able to do that. And that's exciting.
Logistically, how would that work? Would you have to have, is this something that needs to be kept at a low temperature, or how would you get it to some of these countries?
Yeah, we're learning a lot about that. So what we know today versus what we knew a year ago, 3 years ago is very different. So we actually can move this at room temperature. Interesting enough, the cells like warmer temperature than colder temperature. So unlike, the vaccines where, you got to keep them deep frozen, and somehow we were able to make those get all around the world in the pandemic. This is moved around at room temperature. We have shelf life in the final drug product about 10 days. Our drug substance, the cells in the manufacturing process have a storage time of about 6 months. And so how we would handle this in a global environment is, we would harvest off doses on a weekly basis and ship them around the world. Now, that's very viable. Today, corneal transplant has about a 7 to 10 day shelf life in general when they send corneal tissue. So we have basically the same shelf life as modern corneal transplant, and people ship those all around the world. So CorneaGen, our partner company, CorneaGen sends transplants to remote Pacific Islands, to Africa, all over the place, and doesn't have a problem. Their issue is more of they can't scale. Like, you can't scale with corneal transplant, but we can ship corneal transplants all around the world. And that's the supply chain we'll use now. Eventually, would it be nice to have a cryogenically frozen product that we can put to shelf, for long periods of time? Yeah, of course. And we'll do that post-approval. But for now, we think we have a solution. We can still get all around the world.
And it's just a one-off treatment?
One time, the patients that have been reported out of Japan, so at 2 years in the New England Journal of Medicine and 5 years in ophthalmology, those patients are 10 years out now, and they had one treatment. They're doing amazingly well. So the thinking is, by and large, it's a one-time treatment, and you're good for life.
Which is also very good news as well.
We don't have many of those in disease. You look at most areas of medicine, we don't have many of those. Particularly, we don't have many of those that are very safe. We see gene therapies that can do that, but sometimes the gene therapies cause collateral damage, off-target effects. We don't have any of that with cell therapy. So very benign, very effective, but more importantly, durable for life.
You mentioned the fact that the eye is a good target for this. Is this a kind of technology that you envisage could potentially in the future be extended into other areas other than the eye?
I'm an ophthalmology guy, so the eye itself has lots of disease areas that have applications. So what we're really addressing is cell death and non-regenerating cells. And there are a number of diseases of the eye that either undertreated or untreated today, where cell death is the primary cause of vision loss. That's where we'll go. Because again, the advantages of immunoprivileged nature of the eye, the accessibility of the eye, our knowledge base as an organization, how eye diseases work, that's where we'll spend our time and focus. So I think if we look 5-10 years down the horizon, who will Aurion Biotech be when they grow up, I think we'll be the world leader in cell therapy and ophthalmic diseases. I don't see us in the near term going into other parts of the body, but I do think the promise of cell therapy, without question, has great application in other parts of the body. I think we have work to do in oncology. I think we've seen success in hematological diseases with CAR-Ts. We haven't so much in solid tumor disease. So more work to be done there. Hopefully we see breakthroughs there by other companies. Then obviously the autoimmune diseases are starting to show some promise. But again, that's not an area that we're targeting as a company.
You mentioned about this being kind of the first mass market cell therapy. Could you kind of expand on that?
When I mean about mass market, you need a couple things. One, you need to be able to scale at a significant level. And so, again, we talk about 1,000 treatments to one donor. That would address worldwide disease in its entirety, just with our current scaling. So, number two is you have to do it in a cost-effective way. And we've got our scaling at a level where I fundamentally believe we can take this all around the world. I mean, what we've talked about internally is we've got our cost goods at a level now. If we have to give it away in Africa, we'll do that. We'll do fine in the Western world. We'll make a reasonable profit, a responsible profit in the Western world, but in other parts of the world where they may not have the economic feasibility to pay for such a treatment, we have a way to make that available. And so that's the other part of the mass market. The third part is, does it fit in the modern logistics system? And I think we've seen with the pandemic, with vaccines, and certainly we've seen with corneal tissue, we can move cells around pretty easily around the world. Heck, during the pandemic, we were doing studies in El Salvador and how we were bringing the cells in. We would make the cells in Kyoto, Japan, and ship them to San Salvador, El Salvador. If you can imagine, with all the air travel shut down in 2020 and 2021, how difficult that would be. And we were still able to move cells and treat patients. And so if we can do it then, we can do it in normal times. So that's what I think about when I think about the mass market nature of what we're doing. That's important only if the disease is highly prevalent, which this disease is, and if the disease is global in nature. And it appears that corneal endothelial disease is pervasive around the world.
And I guess with some diseases as well, if it's either a rare disease or if it's something that you cure, you don't, I guess in commercial terms, you don't necessarily have that market anymore. But with something like this, everybody is going to age. So it's going to be something that generation upon generation will need.
Yeah, there's 32 million eyes that are prevalent, but there's about 1 million eyes that are incident every single year. So there's plenty of patients just in the incident population. 1 million eyes per year for cell therapy is a lot. In the CAR-T side, I think CAR-Ts are not even over 100,000 treatments a year. If we're doing 1 million treatments a year, we look like an antibody or a small molecule in the number of treatments that we're providing. And so that's what we're targeting. So to your point, even if we get so lucky to treat all 32 million eyes in the Western world with corneal endothelial disease, just the yearly patients that come in the system are plenty for us to treat, and clearly still a mass market area.
You were talking about how this is a one-time deal when it comes to getting the treatment. Is it something that is very easy to deliver? I mean, if you're talking about doing this in Africa, Asia, is it something that local doctors would be able to administer?
That's one of the primary benefits of what we do. So this is a procedure which has 3 steps. So step 1 is we make an incision in the eye. we do a small little windshield wiper technique onto the diseased endothelium. That's to try to wipe off the diseased cells. Step 2, we inject cells. And step 3, we put patients face down up to 3 hours, probably closer to an hour in the real world, but post-approval. But for now, it's 3 hours. That's it. I mean, and step 1 through 2 is not a very long procedure. And it's something that's in the skill sets of any ophthalmologist who does anterior segment surgery. So that means all cataract specialists, all refractive specialists, all glaucoma specialists, all corneal specialists. And in plain numbers, if we take that same construct, today there's about 300 corneal specialists in the U.S. That do corneal transplant. In Japan, there are about 50. Conversely, in the U.S., there's 8,000 cataract specialists, and in Japan, there's about 2,000 cataract specialists. So just by getting it out into the broader audience, you dramatically change the treater base. And that's really important in the US and Japan and Europe, but even more important out in more developing parts of the world. In developing parts of the world, they do cataract surgery, they do retina surgery. That's about it. So if you can get a treatment like this in the hands of cataract specialists, your ability to really get to patients goes up exponentially.
What do the recent FDA designations mean for the company?
It's all good news. I mean, so we received about a month ago both breakthrough status and RMAT status. So breakthrough status is the highest designation one can receive at the early parts of development, really to fast track a program. Breakthrough status requires you to be addressing a serious disease that causes either loss of life or loss of function in the body, and you have to demonstrate evidence that your treatment actually has data to support that you would supplant standard of care. And so that we received. There's only been 3 ophthalmic drugs, including ours, that have received it. So that's a big positive and a really good sign that we're in the right direction. RMAT is a program reserved for cell therapies. This is a newer pathway that the FDA uses for novel cell therapies. And RMAT and Breakthrough work very similarly. We do not know how many programs have both, but I'm pretty sure it's very rare. We made a handful of programs in the world that have ever gotten both. We've had FDA discussions the last month. Like, they are bringing everything to bear to move this as quickly as possible. The right people in the room are in our discussions. The frequency of discussions are much greater, and the willingness to be flexible, the FDA, is greater. So I think all it means in plain English is this will help us get a much higher probability of successful approval and a much faster approval than we originally targeted. The desire of the programs is to get promising treatments to patients faster. And we're already seeing that in the first month we've had a designation.
Connected to that, where are you at with clinical trials?
We fully enrolled approximately 100 patient phase 1/2 back early this year, so in April. We started that trial in October. We made a classic mistake of don't start a trial in the middle of the holidays. So we basically enrolled 5 patients between end of October and January 1. Then we went from January 1 to middle of April, and we enrolled a little over 90 patients. I tend to say we enrolled the trial in 4 months. That's an unheard of enrollment time period for a novel first-in-class, fully blinded, randomized controlled trial, large randomized controlled trial in ophthalmology. And so I think it's a good signal that we have a lot of patients out there that need treatment. And more so, we had to turn away patients at the end because we closed the study down at the end as we hit our study numbers. So that's exciting. So what that means for us is we'll have data early next year. We'll then enter our phase 3 trials about this time next year. And we're kind of looking right now at an approval sometime in 28, maybe faster with breakthrough. That's kind of TBD at this stage. But I think the base case is 28, and I can see scenarios where we're anywhere from 6 to 18 months earlier, depending on where the FDA comes out.
Is there anything else that we didn't talk about that you wanted to mention?
The mass marketing of this program, I think, really puts cell therapy on the map. I mean, cell therapies thus far have been reserved for, frankly, wealthy countries, and been reserved for the most sick patients in the world. I think we're challenging that dogma. Is cell therapy available to the masses? And can cell therapy be used worldwide? And I think for your listeners, that's one of the takeaways I'd like to get across is we're doing that day in and day out. And I kind of challenge the industry. We need to get better at making sure that our treatments are available globally and push ourselves to around the area of scaling to get the cost structure down where people can take any treatment, any of these cell therapies around the world. Because some of the cell therapy, the CAR T is an example. I mean, they're miracle drugs in hematological diseases, but they're only available to a select few. And that's not the approach we're taking to Aurion Biotech. We're addressing a global problem with a global solution.
Well, it seems like this is one development that's going to make a huge difference to a lot of people around the world. The word transformative does get thrown around a lot, not unlike the word disruptive. but it really seems that Aurion's work is going to be truly transformative, and hopefully in the not too distant future. Don't forget to check out the latest news and articles over at Labiotech.eu, and I hope wherever in the world you are, you have a great week ahead. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join us again next time for another Beyond Biotech.